The Michigan Wolverines are college football's most efficient team according to ESPN, scoring a 95.5 on their efficiency metric. On offense, they have a 91.5 net efficiency, which is fifth nationally, a 93 net efficiency on defense, which is the best in all of the country, and a rare low point, 37.2 net efficiency on special teams, which is 116th nationally. Nonetheless, the Wolverines haven't had to use their special teams unit much because how much their offense and defense puts out. Michigan is third in game control and second in average in-game win probability, again from ESPN. They are first in points per play margin and first in yards per point margin. Michigan currently has blown out back-to-back Big Ten road opponents in Nebraska 45-7 and Minnesota 52-10, and they dominated Rutgers, Bowling Green, UNLV, and East Carolina at home, basically while sleepwalking and also making several key mistakes against the Bowling Green Falcons, where JJ McCarthy threw all of his 3 interceptions of the season. It's very safe to say that Michigan has not played anyone who can test them yet. And I'm not touting these statistics to tell you that Michigan's guaranteed to win the Big Ten or guaranteed to win the national title, or even that they're college football's #1 team right now. After all, Ohio State looked like the Big Ten's best team in 2021 and in 2022 for the first 11 regular season games before they bumped into Michigan. College football is about matchups. It's about what happens on a given Saturday between X and Y opponent. It's not all on paper, but the paper, the numbers, and the statistics can present to us a variety of ideas. And a lot of the data, for now, concludes in agreement that Michigan is one of the most dominant, if not the most dominant team in college football right now. And Indiana, on paper, shouldn't test the Wolverines either. In fact, on paper, they're worse than Rutgers. They're worse than Nebraska. They're worse than Minnesota. And they're less talented, according to recruiting rankings, than Nebraska and Rutgers. I think they're slightly more talented than Minnesota, but developmentally, they haven't done a good job. They just fired their offensive coordinator, Walt Bell, and head coach Tom Allen has had a huge fall from grace since having a phenomenal 2020 season with Michael Penix as quarterback, Ty Fry-Fogel, the legend at wide receiver, and Nick Sheridan was their offensive coordinator. Former Michigan quarterback who started under Rich Rod in 2008, and right now he's Washington's tight end coach, I believe, and their tight ends are doing a phenomenal job. But since 2019 and 2020 seasons where Indiana went 8-5 and 6-2, they went 2-10 in 2021. Ironically, when I predicted them to go 10-2, shame on me. They went 4-8 in 2022, and I predicted them to go 3-9, so just a little bit off. This year, I predicted them to go 2-10. And I guarantee you they're probably going to go 2-10. They're one of the worst teams in all of college football right now, and it's painfully obvious. Going into 4 overtimes with Akron, Ohio State played one of their worst games under Ryan Day in the history of his tenure, and they still won by 20. They dominated Indiana State, but who cares? That's a bad FCS team. And Maryland just absolutely blew them out. Today, I'm not just going to be talking about this matchup, but I'm also going to be talking about Michigan and how they should treat these kind of games and what Michigan fans can look forward to in November. Because I got to be honest, I want Penn State and I want Ohio State. And I know Penn State, Ohio State, and Michigan fans, much like me, a fellow Wolverine, want those games as well. Welcome back to the channel, guys. It's your host, College Football with Sam. Before we resume this video, I encourage you to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already and click the notification bell so you can get notified when I post more Michigan football, Big Ten football, and college football content. Please comment your thoughts on this game and on Michigan football season down in the comment section below and like this video. And one last thing, and I'd really appreciate it if you do this solid for me. Check out my Patreon page. And if you care to join, please do so. Your support is never expected, but it's always appreciated. And if you're an All-American or Heisman caliber patron, you get access to my potential power rating system. The rankings for teams 1 through 69, all Power 5 teams, will be posted tomorrow, along with a video explaining how Week 6 impacted potential power. Michigan is won by quite a massive margin. No one in the country is within a field goal of Michigan according to potential power. And a large portion of that is not just due to rankings that I assess and input, but also due to the points per play margin and yards per point margin that favor Michigan by a wide margin. So please check out my Patreon page via the link in the description. But speaking of Michigan and how they've operated this year as a team, they've been very impressive. You know, defensively, they're first in the nation in points allowed per game. They're only allowing 6.7 points per game. That's first in the country. They're 19th in points per game, 19th scoring offense, and I expect that with how they've been playing really over the past 3 games, I just respect Rutgers' defense. I expect that number at the end of the year to probably finish in the low 40s, and that's impressive given the fact that the new clock rules are something that Jim Harbaugh loves to take advantage of. Michigan is still, I think, 132nd, last time I checked, in seconds per play. They take up about 31.9, 32, 32.1 seconds per snap. They love to melt the clock, and Minnesota, Nebraska, and Rutgers weren't really capable of stopping Michigan's offense, and yet Michigan was able to score 31, 45, and 52 points on those defenses. I know there were 2 defensive touchdowns against Minnesota, but what's even more impressive is Michigan's starting defense, pardon me for that pause, Michigan's starting defense has scored more points on defense, or as many points on defense, as the starting defense has given up all season long. That's bonkers. I mean, that's crazy. I think this is the best defense in all of college football. The offense does have some concerns. The offensive line has showed that it's not quite as good yet, or maybe it won't be as good for the whole season as the 2022 unit. Donovan Edwards still has yet to break through, and we're halfway through the season. Kalel Mullings, I think, looks like the better running back, and until Donovan Edwards breaks out, I think it's in Michigan's best interest to give Kalel Mullings more carries and more attempts to prove himself as a running back on the field, because he's looked great, in my opinion. And it's awesome to see that he's successfully made the transition, I think, from linebacker to running back in a similar way that Sainristil still has made a successful transition from wide receiver to noseback that he made from 2021 to 2022. So this team is, look, they are good from so many angles, but what can they learn from Indiana? What can they do better against Indiana? Because there are areas like special teams, I think offensive line, that can be improved, and Indiana does have a legitimate defense. So what's the matchup look like here? Indiana's a 2-3 football team. They're 60th out of 69 teams according to Potential Power. They're one of the worst teams in Power 5 football, and I would say one of the worst teams in college football, including Group of 5 teams, period, amen. They're bad. Michigan, by comparison, is 6-0. They're number 1 in Potential Power, and this is one of the first matchups where we get to see something that I'm trying to fix with Potential Power, but maybe I will never fix it. I'll just explain it away to the point that Potential Power is meant to measure and predict games and measure the success of teams in a different way from other indexes. Potential Power, as suggested by the word potential and the word power, is trying to predict what's the potential of each team and how are they living up to it right now. So returning production is sort of always factored in throughout the season. Obviously, to the degree it's factored in, decreases the longer the season goes along, but recruiting rankings, talent, and returning production, all that stuff matters. It just diminishes throughout the season and is replaced by more accurate numbers and statistics that correlate with end of season success, such as points per play margin and yards per point margin. Potential Power also plainly looks at games and predicts them based off of teams leaving in their starters for all 4 quarters and for the most part operating at peak efficiency in every game. Right now, it can't factor in, if a team is exhausted and injuries have to be manually adjusted, and it can't factor in for garbage time. All of these things I hope to add in at some point as my knowledge on data analysis, data science, and other things improve, even though that's really a side project to this whole channel. But that's why you see the fact that Vegas's line is 33.5 in favor of Michigan, which is a big line, and many people, in fact, I think more than half of all public bettors are picking Indiana to cover the spread. Part of that makes sense, and I think there's logic behind it with the fact that rainy weather and high winds are likely, which could turn this into a defensive battle, and Michigan might also be disinterested. Potential Power thinks that Michigan will win by more than 8 touchdowns. Now, obviously, that is very unlikely. I'm not going to say Michigan will win by that much, but they could, and they probably would if they left in their starters for all 4 quarters and tried as hard as they possibly could. And that's how Potential Power really predicts matchups, is assuming that every team's going to be operating at peak efficiency. They're going to try as hard as they can, and whoever is on the roster right now is going to stay healthy throughout the game. It makes tons of assumptions. I'm hoping to make Potential Power more flexible in that regard, but this is where we get to see that weird line where Michigan is just, look, they're favored by 8 touchdowns according to Potential Power. Now, they won't win by 8 touchdowns, but in the sense of how they'll control this game, there's a chance that it will feel like, Michigan 49, Indiana nothing at the half, even if it's just maybe Michigan 24-0 or 24-7 or something like that. And we've seen that against Rutgers, against especially Nebraska, I would say, where Michigan at half, despite not having maybe a lead of 35 or 42 points, it feels like Michigan has already won the game. Even against Rutgers, when they were only up at halftime 14-7, there was this confidence in my mind, from a neutral perspective even, that Michigan was just going to flat out win based off of how they controlled the game after that, first or second play. It was the second play of the game where Christian Dremel took that slant 76 yards to the house. That was a really great play by him. So Michigan's a big favorite by Vegas and by Potential Power, and you all in your picks through my community post really reflect that. Only 9% of you, which is just over 200 people, picked Indiana to win. Meanwhile, well over 2,000 of you all. This was a very, very engaging post. Typically, I only get anywhere from 1,000 to 2,000 votes on these, but I'm glad that I'm seeing more votes per post and that you all are contributing your vote, because they're reflected sort of as a survey in these videos. Over 90%, over 2,000 people picked Michigan to win. That's very lopsided. And even when I've asked you all through the community post who's going to win between, Ohio State, Maryland, or even Ohio State, Purdue, or Penn State and let's say Iowa or Illinois, or, Penn State and let's say they play Rutgers, those numbers probably won't be that lopsided. Michigan's only lost to Indiana, I think, 2 times in the past 40 years. One of them came in 2020. Indiana has competed with Michigan under Tom Allen several times before. In 2021 and in 2022, Indiana hung around for a while before Michigan finally put them to sleep. Indiana hung around for about a half with Michigan in 2019. And in 2018, they led entering the half. But at the end of the day, Michigan, just with sheer talent and really bully ball in most of those games outside of 2022, where McCarthy threw for over 300 yards, the Wolverines eventually pulled away. This is a home game for Michigan. Michigan's given a 96.6% chance to win. And really, I mean, I'd be lying to you if I said that Indiana has more than a crumb of a chance in this game. It's not advisable for Michigan to overlook the Hoosiers, though, because, like I've said, Indiana has beaten us once before under Tom Allen. And look, Michigan plays Indiana pretty competitively for at least a half, pretty much every year. So Indiana's physical, especially on the defensive side of the ball. What gets them is really their lack of dynamicness or dynamism. I'm probably making up words there, I'm sorry, on offense. Their offense is slow. It's insufferable to watch. They have a better quarterback situation and a better offensive line than they do last year, and good on Rod Carey, their offensive line coach, for that, and Taven Jackson is their current starter at quarterback. So Indiana at 2-3, they do present some areas that can be threatening to the Wolverines. Michigan can learn from Indiana in the scheme and improve in multiple areas, but it's highly unlikely that Indiana at the end of the day will compete with this team, maybe for a quarter or for a half like we've seen in the past, especially given the weather. But Michigan everywhere except for special teams, they've had an unusually bad special teams unit. I think that's due to the loss of Brad Robbins, AJ Henning, and Jake Moody, are three primary special teamers from last year. AJ Henning wanted more playing time at wide receiver, so he transferred to Northwestern. And Jake Moody and Brad Robbins, their eligibility expired. Moody was drafted in the 3rd round by the 49ers, so Michigan replaced a ton of production on special teams, and James Turner's a hit-and-miss kicker, and special teams hasn't had to be used much. I mean, Jake Thaw's been pretty much, fair catching the ball when he's punted to, and we haven't had to use James Turner much because the red zone offense is that good, and Tommy Doman, the punter, hasn't had to be brought out much because, again, offensive efficiency. So Michigan is an amazing team right now, and staff-wise, they're definitely ahead of the Hoosiers. The Hoosiers are without an offensive coordinator. Their defensive staff has taken a huge hit in recent memory, and Tom Allen, let me tell you something. I think he's probably the worst head coach in the Big Ten. Now, with David Braun and Harlan Barnett as the interns at Northwestern and Michigan State, maybe you can debate that with me. But entering the season before the firings of Fitzgerald and Tucker, I thought he was the worst, and I still pretty much think that right now. I think Harlan Barnett, with the turmoil that happened middle of the season, I'm not going to place the success or failure of Michigan State on him, more so placing that on Tucker. And with Northwestern, I'm not placing that on David Braun either because they're interim head coaches. David Braun got a win over Minnesota that I don't think Tom Allen will get all season long. And I would pick Harlan Barnett's Spartans right now to beat Tom Allen on the road. That's how bad I think this Indiana team is. They have bright spots. Jalen Lucas at running back is an example of this. Their wide receiver core has some underrated talent like Donovan McCulley, who transitioned from a quarterback to wide receiver. And they have Josh Henderson at running back. And defensively, whether it's Aaron Casey, whether it's Andre Carter, whether it's Noah Pierre, whether it's Marcus Burris Jr., they have talent defensively. But their coaching staff, this is on Tom Allen, they can't finish. And talent is a part of that reason, also resources. Indiana does not have a good football program. They prefer their basketball program. But, look at Rutgers. Even under Greg Schiano and some of the failings they've had over the past 2 seasons, they've done better. Maryland doesn't have a lot of resources, and yet Mike Loxley, I think, has a fringe top 25 team right now. Purdue is going through a total rebuild, and they look better, in my opinion, than Indiana. This all falls on the head coach in Tom Allen, who's a great motivator, but I just don't think he can get the job done. Jim Harbaugh, meanwhile, wins over 75% of his games. He's a back-to-back Big Ten championship-winning head football coach, and his staff has some of the better assistants and coordinators in the country, like Jesse Minter and Sharon Moore, the defensive and offensive coordinator, respectively. So I give staff to Michigan here, and every other position on the field I really don't think is up for debate necessarily. JJ McCarthy has 1,290 passing yards, 11 touchdowns, 3 interceptions through the air, a 188.5 passer rating. He's completing 78% of his passes and averaging over 10 yards per pass attempt. Michigan has three. I nearly counted JJ McCarthy as a running back. My bad. They have 3 running backs with over 100 yards, and Blake Corum nearly has 500 rushing yards. Michigan overall is averaging 5.1 yards per carry. They have 15 rushing touchdowns and 1,111 rushing yards on the season. Michigan also has Roman Wilson, Cornelius Johnson, and Colston Loveland in their receiver core, and young wide receivers Darius Clemens, Samaj Morgan, Tyler Morris, and Frederick Moore are stepping up as well. I think next year, Michigan's wide receiver room, even with the likely departures of Roman Wilson and Cornelius Johnson, might take huge steps forward compared to previous seasons. But Wilson has 8 receiving touchdowns and nearly 400 receiving yards. And if Michigan, plays an extra game in the Big Ten championship game, and let's say they make the college football playoff and win their first semifinal and play in 15 games, Wilson could totally be a 1,000-yard receiver with well over 10 receiving touchdowns. He's one of the college football and Big Ten football's better receivers right now. His speed, athleticism, route running, it's by far the best on the team. And Cornelius Johnson's a very reliable possession receiver, and Colston Loveland's one of the better tight ends in all of college football. Drake Nugent, Zach Zinner, Trevor Keegan. I think that right now is the best interior offensive line group in the country. And at tackle, whether it's Miles Hinton, Carson Barnhart, Trente Jones, or Ladarius Henderson, they're doing phenomenal there. They've improved compared to what we saw against Rutgers, where I thought they struggled a bit. And defensively, Michigan has 14 sacks on the season, 16 pass deflections, 7 interceptions, 4 forced fumbles, and over 300 tackles. And Chris Jenkins has just been a phenomenal player in my mind. He has 1 sack, 16 total tackles, an interception, and he constantly gets pressure along with Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant, who have combined for 3 sacks. Josiah Stewart and Derek Moore have 3 and 2 sacks respectively. This team is just, they're phenomenal. And Mike Sainer still is a pick 6. Keon Sabb is a pick 6. Will Johnson has a pick 6. I actually forgot about Mike Sainer still's pick 6. Shame on me, but that's 3 defensive touchdowns. 3 of them. And in the first half, whether it's Minnesota or Rutgers, Michigan has scored in the first half with their starting defense. Their starting defense has scored more total points than they've allowed. That's nuts. That's absolutely crazy. So plenty of great players, elite players all around, whether it's Josiah Stewart, Derek Moore, Jalen Harrell, Braden McGregor, or at tackle, Cam Good, Chris Jenkins, Mason Graham, and Kenneth Grant. Michigan's D-line is elite. Ernest Hausman, Junior Colson, they've had solid play. At secondary, I do have some concerns because all of Michigan's bigger plays and their 2 touchdowns that they've allowed in the first half of games are on medium to long-range touchdown passes. So I think the secondary is probably the weakness of this defense, but it's still a near elite to elite secondary. For Indiana, they have Taven Jackson at quarterback, who has 862 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, and a 125.2 passer rating. Indiana at times also started or put in Brendan Sorsby to play. And at running back, Indiana has Jalen Lucas, Christian Turner, and Josh Henderson. They have a very underrated running back rotation that's rushed for over 500 yards, 7 touchdowns. They're only averaging 3.2 yards per carry, though. So, along with the receiving core, which has barely over 1,000 receiving yards and 4 receiving touchdowns, Indiana's offense is less than dynamic. But they've only allowed 8 sacks through 5 games, so the offensive line and the offense overall has improved. The defense only has 9 sacks, 6 interceptions, and 20 passes defended. It's not close to Michigan's level of defense, but especially on the defensive line and front, they are rather physical. So Indiana, I think they present players like Andre Carter who can, test Michigan's tackles, try and make JJ McCarthy uncomfortable, and Noah Pierre is the leader of Indiana's defense, and I think that it'll be interesting to see how he commands the defense and how Indiana can perform against this Michigan offense, and how Michigan's offense also plays through what likely will be bad weather and heavy wind. Will they just pound the rock? Will they still try and throw and take some medium and deep shots like they have been with McCarthy? We'll see. Some players to watch in this game, I think, are the running backs for both of these respective teams. For Indiana, this is Jalen Lucas. Jalen Lucas last year was an All-American return specialist. This season, he has 49 carries for 212 yards. He's averaging 4.3 yards per carry, and he has 2 rushing touchdowns. In the receiving category, he has 19 receptions for 140 yards, and he has 1 receiving touchdown. He has 181 kickoff return yards on 8 attempts, and he has 26 yards on 8 punt return attempts. So they're using Jalen Lucas everywhere. Can he get involved in the return game? Can he be a threat as a receiver? And can he be a threat on the ground? He's 5'9", 170. He's definitely a short, quick, speed and space kind of back. If he can find a hole and get past the first line of defense, and Michigan, let's say, isn't an aggressive blitz or their players are out of position, Jalen Lucas can totally have a house call. His long rush of the season has only been 25 yards, and he had a long carry of 71 yards in 2022. So he's looking for a big carry, likely for a score. Let's see if he can get it, and let's see if this rushing attack for Indiana can test Michigan's front four, which did allow over 100 rushing yards to Minnesota. For Michigan, I'm looking at Blake Corum as a player to watch. I think he might have a season high of carries in this game, primarily due to the weather and also the fact that if you're Michigan, playing your A-plus game here doesn't matter. And they did that against Nebraska. I'd say they played their A-minus game against Minnesota. The pick sixes did inflate the score, and I think it was the best or perhaps second best performance of the week, depending on if you value Kentucky being a ranked team or if you even view Kentucky as a good team that Georgia destroyed. But Michigan did have some things against Indiana that they could have fixed. Corum has 83 carries on the year for 494 yards. He has 10 rushing touchdowns, and he's averaging 6 yards per carry. Right now, his season high of carries in a game is 21. I wouldn't be surprised if, let's say, he gets like 25 carries in this game. 30 is too much. They want to keep him healthy. He only got 9 against Minnesota, but I don't know if McCarthy's going to be passing all that much, and Indiana is a physical defense, so I don't know how many big runs or even big passes Indiana will give up. Indiana is also going to punt the football a lot, I think, unless Jalen Lucas and Taven Jackson and their wide receiver core and tight ends can really put together a perfect game plan. Indiana might go 3 and out for the first 3 quarters every drive, so that leaves a lot of room open for carries. So it wouldn't shock me if Corum at his season high in carries, but maybe they rest him like they did against Minnesota and partially against Nebraska or let's say East Carolina, and you see more of Donovan Edwards or more of Kalel Mullings and even Leon Franklin and some of the 4th, 5th stringers and walk-ons. Maybe even Cole Cabana. We'll just have to see where this all goes. But I think Corum will break 100 rushing yards, probably have 2 rushing touchdowns, so on and so forth. He's a player to watch along with Indiana running back Jalen Lucas. My prediction for this game is Michigan comes out, and it's a business trip, but given how bad Indiana is, and the fact that Michigan is no longer totally sleepwalking through games with Jim Harbaugh back, I think they score over 50 points. It probably takes them 3 quarters to get to this total, and then they lay off. And they'll hold Indiana to less than 10 points for sure. I'm thinking 3. This Indiana team struggled all day to score against Maryland, and it was really only in garbage time when the game was out of reach that they scored against a Maryland defense that isn't that deep. Michigan is one of the deepest teams, if not the deepest team in college football right now. I know that Indiana's coming off of a bye. They're probably going to be motivated, but I don't think they're built to even compete for 2 drives with a team like Michigan. And whether it's, Ohio State, Georgia, Oregon, and Washington, other teams who I think could be classified as elite or near elite, I don't think they'd compete with them, especially Oregon and Washington with their offenses, or Georgia if they're having a great day, for 2 drives. So I think that Indiana is walking into a death trap here. I know they only played, they played Ohio State within 3 touchdowns. They only lost 23-3, but Indiana's the type of team where under Allen, they tend to get worse as the year goes on due to the mental and physical attrition of playing the schedules they do. Injuries pile up. The team loses motivation because, they already have 6 losses by the month of November, or 5, and they know they're not improving or going to a bowl game. Like in 2021, after that game against Michigan State, the team just quit. I mean, they flat out quit. I think Michigan quarterback, former Indiana quarterback, Jack Tuttle, will play a significant amount of time in this game. Michigan will have over 500 total yards just because Indiana's going to punt more than Nebraska and Minnesota did, and Nebraska and Minnesota are much better than Indiana. Michigan will dominate this inferior opponent. The defense will not allow a point until the 4th quarter either. I think Indiana at some point in garbage time will get into the red zone, and Tom Allen will just want to avoid the shutout. So the Hoosiers give up 2 turnovers or more. Michigan just piles it on, but really in a business trip-like way. I don't think Michigan will intentionally run up the score. I just think they're much better of a team. They'll win, they'll cover, and it will be on to Michigan State, which Michigan State's not in a great place, but it is a rivalry game, and even at the lowest of lows, State has played the Wolverines close. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. Remember to check out my Patreon page via the link in the description. I want to give a quick shout out to my Patreon supporters, Spencer Bringhurst and Noah DDLC, my all-American patrons, and Will Loftus, Gabriel Calendar, Roaming Gnome, and Matthew Sale, my all-conference patrons. Your support is never expected, but it is always appreciated. Have a great day, guys, and I'll see you soon.